as well. It's just up to you, and if everyone is, you know,
Sure.
if everyone's
As long
willing
as people
to
don't
sit
get
in,
bored, I'm good.
yeah, exactly. So I'm happy to keep listening. So
Awesome.
yeah.
So, just to introduce this production, this was I worked on this project. Well, I worked on both seasons. So this is a TV show that was on Netflix called Happy, and it's almost, the way I describe it is like a slightly more violent, grotesque version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And it's based on a graphic novel that did very, very well. And then it was later, like a year or two later, it was adapted into a 3D animated production. And it kind of blends like visual effects with cartoony. The way it was pitched to me sounded really appealing because I hadn't seen anything of the show before. And they basically described it to me as they want to almost caricature it and exaggerate it in the same way you might with, say, a Sony production, but then they also wanted to have these very like subtle and like more internal moments that you may see from, say, a Pixar film. This is the way they pitched it, and it just sounded like they had quite a broad like spectrum of animation that you could cover, and of course every studio does every side of that, but it sounded like they wanted to take the complete extremes of both ends, and it sounded like something that was like very attractive to an animator. And so I ended up working on the first season, which was, I think that was about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and then I came back for season 2, which was about 18 months ago. And so this was with Axis Studios, and we were based in London. They're mostly based in Glasgow, and that's their main office, and they made a small branch in London, which they hired a small team of like experienced animators, and that was like their second team that would take on like maybe 3 or 4 episodes for the season, and then the rest would be done in Glasgow. And so we had the privilege in season 2 of working on the first episode, which would reintroduce Happy, the main character, who is an imaginary friend of a little girl, and he's this weird blue unicorn who's voiced by Patton Oswalt. He did some really nice like voice performance to work to, and he's very crazy and he's quite innocent. And our challenge for this season was, in season 1 he was this very innocent thing who didn't see the bad in life, and his sidekick, his side partner, who's a real actor called Christopher Maloney, would be kind of the counter to that. So there was like this contrasted duo where he'd be like, "Oh, fun and sunshine," and he'd be like, everything's terrible. And so it made this quite fun dynamic. And so in season 2, the main challenge was to see Happy grow as a character, in the sense that he was starting to mature. So he was getting into like his teenage pubescent stage, and so it was quite fun to experiment with him growing up essentially. And I had the privilege of working on the first time we were introduced to Happy. So I'm just going to give a little behind the scenes footage of this is a combination of reference, my thumbnails, the final product, and also what we had a process called overlays, which is where they brought in some 2D animators and storyboarders to actually draw and like do a very rough animated part of over the live action plate to give us a clearer understanding of what was happening in the scene. So you can see the overlays in this top right corner, and then my reference in the top left, and then the final plate. So I'm actually going to turn my sound back on for this. So I'll just go through and break down my thumbnails as well. So having Happy was a very difficult challenge to try and find appeal in, because in his default pose, that when we brought him in as a rig, he wasn't really designed to accentuate the shapes that you could get out of him. But thankfully, at the same time, the rig was super sophisticated, and you could literally grab any part of him and pull him around, stretch him, scale him, rotate him in any way, and it was very flexible. And so it allowed you to kind of manipulate him and make him more appealing to his design. And so in here, I was trying to think of like slightly more graphic shapes that you could play with. And some of these thumbnails don't fully translate in the end result, and that's just due to client notes and director's feedback, supervisors, etc. But they most of the time they're pretty placed. So you can see like that face expression. They just really wanted to come up on his face, which is really fun. So I really pushed his cheeks out to the sides, so you can see his teeth. Like, it's very, very cartoony. It was really fun to work on. Oh. So here we got some more thumbnails. So I'd be thinking about not only my key poses, but how I could really like make a cartoony breakdown that would be really fun to watch. And this is a challenge because this shot I think was only 14 frames. And so it's like, what can I do with 14 frames? They wanted it to be crazy because the intention behind this sequence was it was all like a build up. So he's waiting for the clock to strike, the alarm clock, and then he just outbursts of excitement. And so they wanted him to do this cool spin. And so I had this idea that I didn't really get time to justify it, but there was something from Winnie the Pooh with Tigger where when he gets really excited, he like coils his body. And then as he releases, his legs just keep spinning even though he's on the spot. So he's kind of standing there and his legs are just going crazy. And I thought that was really fun. So I had this idea that as he spins, you got these crazy, like multiple limbs as he spins around, and then like his ears kind of like coiling on themselves, and then he unravels. And to get this timing, because it was so crucial that every frame counted for such a short shot, I did a quick sphere pass where I just did a little spin timing. Oh, if that's going to play. Yeah, just to get the timing right, and then I used that as a template. I didn't like do anything like I did in Spider-Man where I constrained it or anything like that. But this, it was more just to get a timing template. So here we've got some more thumbnails. This, I probably think, so this shot was probably the hardest shot that I did on the production, because not only was it a very important part in terms of his character development, this is where he discovers that he's going through puberty. And so he sees these little blue feathers under his armpits, and he starts to freak out. And so it's quite funny. So he's going off on this little angry tangent about whatever's happening on the scene. And then he's like, what's this? And he sees it, he's like, oh my God. And so it was quite, and then there's like a more vulnerable beat that happens after where he's embarrassed. He's like, I don't know what's going on with my body. And so there was like 3 massive like character beats that happened, and it was important to get that right. But not only from a performance side was this difficult, but also it was in a mirror. And the main performance was happening in the reflection. And so it was a matter of thinking, do I animate the thing in real world space, and then they render the reflection, and then they can see whatever I've animated in the opposite direction? Or do I cheat it, so I animate the inside of the mirror? So, and then they composite it in, so it looks like it's the reflection? Or, in my case, and I was ambitious, I said, could I have 2 rigs? Could I make 2 characters and make them look like they're both doing the exact same thing from different angles? And that way, that gives me the ability to make him look appealing from both angles, because with his design, he can look it's very easy to make him look ugly from the back, because he has quite a flat head and he has this very massive nose. And so that was a challenge if I only did it using 1 rig. And so they asked me to go to a senior from season 1 who had animated a mirror shot, and I said to him, I'm thinking of doing it with 2 rigs, is that okay? And he said, that's how I did it too, because it gives you more creative license. It's twice as much work, but it'll pay off more. And so that's what I did. So this is the final result. And yeah, it was quite a challenge. It took a long time. Yeah, so that was really tough. To try and make sure that like right, because in a reflection, right is left and left is right. So I was like, okay, so this animation from this angle has to still look appealing, but to the reflection, that needs to respond the same way, but even though they're opposite limbs. And so that was probably the hardest bit to try and think about in my head. Yeah, so I've got onto the next shot.
Hey Aaron, can you quickly explain, because Eddie's asking about the sphere technique and the red and blue
Yes.
as well on your quick spins.
Yes.
Just that technique for everyone.
Sure. So essentially what I've done is, in order to get my timing right and to feel like the rotations are correct, I would animate a sphere with two textures on it. In this case, the blue being his front and then the red being his back, just so I had an idea of orientation. And then I would use a sphere just using, it's almost like a bouncing ball. Like I take it back to the core foundations of how we're taught to animate. So I would do like a bouncing ball pass where it would just give me a rough idea of how he's going to stretch, how he's going to squash, like his general volume, and then how fast he's going to move around in space. And so by doing this, you can see how the final result and that sphere pass look relatively similar in terms of their timing and how fast it's spinning. And just allowing it to, even like the squash frames and the stretch frames, gave me enough indication to be like, okay, so that's where my pose is going to be, that's where my breakdown is going to be. And that way, all I had to do was focus on the poses. I didn't have to worry about, oh, but my timing's not feeling right, and then I'm gonna have to reload all my poses again. So by doing a simple ball pass, it's almost planning for trying to avoid making mistakes later. So just by using that as a template, it makes it much easier to use. And that was the same technique I kind of used on Spider-Man, but instead I was mainly using it for staging. So if I animated a ball just as a simple shape to begin with, then all I had to do was get the whole rig, attach that to the ball, and then the character is going to move where it needs to within the camera space. But then once that's done, I'm like, okay, my character staging is done. Now all I have to worry about is poses and my breakdowns, my anticipation. So the actual animation side of it, slightly less than the staging. Because with that Spider-Man shot, if I hadn't done that ball pass, I would have been thinking, okay, so now he's got to come down, but now the arm's got to come up, and then the head's got to go left, and then the leg's got to go right, and it's just too much to think about at once. So if you can isolate your staging so that your timing is kind of already pre-planned, then you can focus on what are my key poses, what's going to lead the action, and by dissecting it that way, it just makes the whole scene like twice as much more manageable, and you're not having to overthink many things at once, because we're only human, and at least for me, I can't multitask like that. It's that classic thing of Richard Williams where he asks Milk Cole if he listens to music, he's like, I can't think of two things at once. And that's kind of like me, so I can't think about my staging whilst I'm also trying to animate at the same time. So doing it this way kind of it simplifies it for me, at least.
Yeah, you also have the advantage of playing it in real time in your viewport.
Yeah.
So you don't have to play blast, continuously with every change.
Yeah, exactly.
You can just hit play and just see what's going on. Get your time.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't take. Yeah, it just takes so much time off your hands. So again, this is just showing some poses where I'm thinking about the shapes of his body, and then like my anticipation. Like this is quite a simple shot, and it was just making it fun and like making it appealing, really. Let's turn the sound back on. So it's quite a fun one, but it's just like I wanted to still experiment with timing. So as we anticipate here, you can see that the legs trail behind, and then as the head settles, then the hips trail and they overshoot, and then that overshoots from the legs, and so almost everything like unravels after the head's hit its peak. This is like a fan favorite on the production, so I was told. After I animated this shot, a lot of people were like, that was so cool. And to be honest, I can't take full credit for it because I looked at a lot of reference online. So this was a really fun shot. It's just sometimes you just get these moments where you know how to animate it and you're like, oh, this is just going to be really fun. And so there was this moment where Happy is in the toilet. He's in the bathroom and he needs to get out, but the door's closed, so he squeezes under it, but he can't squeeze under it properly because his butt's too big. And so he's trying to scramble to get himself out, and then he has to like suck his gut in almost, and he's like, and then he pops under the door. And so I did these poses where like I really pushed like the line of action in his body, so you can see. Hold on, let me just make that a bit thicker. So like, still not thick enough. There you go. So you can really see how I was like pushing, like almost a simple shape. That's what I was trying to say about graphic shapes. Like I've really simplified it into one form, and then I've tried to sculpt different parts of his body that still keep him like connected in his anatomy, but can still create this simple shape. And then like I had these ideas where like as he squeezes, his like tail clenches into like a zigzag, so then he's like squeezing, and then like his butt kind of gets bigger and it inflates as he goes to suck in. So like this is the anticipation pose, and like his tail comes up, and I thought it's just funny, and it was actually really cool because they ended up like editing some music to it, so you can hear this like whoop, 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 kind of sound, which is really fun. And then here, I just wanted to put this section here because I am a massive fan of Tom and Jerry, and I grew up with it as a kid, and I just felt like this is a great opportunity to add in some Tom and Jerry kind of style. And so I found this really cool reference. There's a shot in Tom and Jerry with, I mean, they do it all the time, but there's one particular shot that I liked of Tom where he goes to run and his legs just scramble before he goes. And so I took those frames, literally just copied them, and I said, okay, so that leg's here, this limb's here, and that gave me a rough idea of where like the timing's going to be as they scramble, because timing in like really cartoony, like those kind of moments, it's like every frame counts. And so I thought it was really important. So this is the final shot. It was really fun to do. So I'll just frame by frame that. I'll say in the sound off. So you can see, unfortunately, they motion blurred the heck out of it. So you can't see all those beautiful graphic shapes that I made, but it's there, I promise you. So as he comes in, there's this one frame. I'll try and draw over the top of it because I know how the pose was. So like essentially, you know, his horn was here, his ears were back here, this is his head, then like there was one leg around here, tail's back here, and then there was one arm kind of around here. So he's squeezing. And then in this frame, the head's already straight away, it's under the door now. His horn's still kind of like sucking in, his ears are still sucking in. And then I've really stretched the volume in his body, so now his hips are here. And then you can see now where like I tried to really scale his butt cheeks. And then he's got his tail. And this is where it starts to go slightly more into like the Tom and Jerry like legs, where you can see now they got this timing. I was really exaggerating the hoofs. So like, even though they're not particularly like beautiful shapes in motion, because it's so fast, you more feel it than you see it. So you can see how like I'm creating these curves. So it's like everything's flowing in this direction to create this like scrambling effect. It's like I've almost broken the foot back on itself here. And then again, now it's completely broken, but this is what I mean by like breaking smart. So if you can create a shape that just reads and it flows within that motion, then sometimes it's okay to break the rate. But you have to be very aware and conscious about how you do it. So you can see there, that was kind of the anticipation pose where I like inflated his butt and his tail's coming up. His legs are sucking in. And then we've got some slightly more subtle stuff as well. So this is, I wanted to show this one because I wanted to give credit to, I can't remember what his surname is now, but Tim, our 2D animator, who was for the overlays, did some really nice performance stuff here. And so you can see how I've adapted his poses into something that I felt was slightly more appealing to his design. But they're very close, like all the performance is still very similar. So I'll show you that. Sorry. So you can see there how like I tried to create these really nice like graphic shapes in his body. Let's try and draw over that. So like trying to simplify, like I say, like these square shape here, then he goes into like a thicker hip, and that flows into his legs. And then keeping like a clean silhouette for his neck, and just trying to simplify his form as much as possible. And it was like, because if you think about his nose could quite simply be a round blob, and I felt like you could change that form just by favoring one side. So from like a 3/4 angle, if you favored it so that one side was slightly thinner, it just made something more appealing. So let's just get rid of this. This is kind of what I'm thinking about in terms of posing. So then like, you know, I could have a slightly more 3/4, then you got a corner of his mouth. And then like a teeth thing. He's got his eyes on top. Some brows in there. And then like something like this with these little nostrils. And then like you can add his teeth in there. There's something like that felt more appealing than if I were to like just have a round thing, which is what came in by default. So it's trying to construct shapes that kind of just guide the eye, and it makes it more appealing and flows in a direction. This shot was very fun as well. Sorry, you were going to say something, Eddie?
Yes, actually. I was just going to read a question, so
sure.
Glad you caught that. Shaik asks, Arran is capturing more than 2 reference videos for the shot. May I know the reason? Or just one for the body acting and one for the face? In your previous shot.
Exactly. So basically, I do tend to do this quite often. I'm guessing he's referring to us, or he or she was trying to refer to this shot, where basically I would do my first pass. I would just do with the body, like I would act with the body, and I'm not focusing on my face. And the reason I do that is because you should be able to sell an emotion through the body without having to see someone's face as being upset or happy or whatever. And so the first thing I'll do is I'll do a pass on like body language and making sure that reads. And after that, I sometimes, it depends on the shot and what it requires. If it's something super subtle, then I tend to also do a pass where I record my face doing the performance and trying to reenact the same thing, but just focusing on my face. And that's more for the subtle things. So like maybe how I dart an eye, how I blink, how my eyebrows raise. Subtle things that maybe I just wouldn't think about adding that may bring something extra to the performance. And it's not, like I say, it's not something I do every time, but I do try to make a conscious effort to do it this way now, especially with the stuff we're doing in the feature film, what I'm working on at the moment. I try and do a pass on the body and on the face, because even if you feel like it's working as it is, I feel like there's due justice in just doing it, even just to try. And sometimes they're like, there's nothing in here that I feel like is working, or maybe someone else could reference it for you. It doesn't have to be yourself. I ask fellow animators to do reference with me all the time. And just seeing like subtle things that someone might do that might help. But yeah, I do try actively to do a body pass and a face pass in reference now. Going back to this, there's a really cool, this is a really fun and like grotesque moment, but I have quite a twisted sense of humor in some ways. And so for me, like some people found this sequence quite disgusting and disturbing, but I found it really funny. Basically, there's a moment in this, it's an R-rated show, but there's a moment where Happy, as he's growing up, he finds a love interest, and there's a, not explicit, but there's an implied sex scene. And it's quite funny because you just wouldn't think about this in, like animation. You don't usually see these kinds of things. And they made it humorous. It wasn't supposed to be grotesque or disgusting. It's just implied. And there's this funny beat in there where I got to animate this shot where Happy is pleasuring the other half, and she says, "Mind the teeth," and he says, "Sorry, I can't help it. I'm all teeth." And it implies, everything's implied, but you don't see anything. And it just seemed really fun, and so I really went like to town this shot and just made it as funny as I could. And so I actually filmed myself on my bed, like coming out from under the sheets, and then like acting this performance. And I even filmed. I got my friend, another animator, Marta, to hold the camera from between my knees, and then I also did the angle from her perspective, where, you could see her knees on the side of the camera. So I'm trying to think about it from every angle, and these are my thumbnails for it. And then this is the fun animation. It was really fun to do. It was just, I thought it was really funny. And it's a subtle, like, implied thing, but I just thought, this would be such a funny sequence to work on. And so I was very lucky to work on that. And I'll quickly skim through these ones, otherwise I'll be taking up too much time. But yeah, so you can see here like how I'm thinking about my acting choices. In terms of a question I was asked earlier was about how I approach a shot and what I'm thinking about when I'm blocking. And I think that's a really important step. So something that I consciously do every time now, which I know a lot of animators learnt from this video as well, which was a video from Sir Wade. He has a YouTube channel, and he interviews a DreamWorks supervisor called JP Sands, and it's about subtext. And subtext is essentially, for those who don't know, is essentially what the character is thinking, not what they're saying. And a lot of people make the mistake of trying to act to what the character says, and not what they're thinking. And so what you essentially find in the subtext is it's not what they're saying, but how they're saying it and what they're actually saying. So if I said, I don't like this piece of bread, you could say that 1,000 different ways. And it's the way they say it that creates the subtext. So when you say, I don't like this piece of bread, it could be, I'm really full, or it could be, this is disgusting. So it could be saying like, actually, I don't want this piece of bread. I don't like this piece of bread. And that sounds slightly more casual. It could be like, I don't like this piece of bread. And that completely changes your performance. And so what I try to do is I listen to the dialogue from the character, and then I write down what I think the subtext is. And so in this case, he says, you'll see in this next shot, he says, and do you think another bottle of bar swap is a good idea? And essentially the subtext, off the top of my head, is, do you think going back to your old ways as an alcoholic is going to make things better? And so by acting to the subtext, it's going to make your acting feel more genuine, because you're getting down to the core of what the character is thinking, not what they're actually saying. Because your brain doesn't respond the same, like your brain doesn't always, your mouth doesn't always keep up with your brain. And so there's something about, you just get a more genuine performance. You avoid like cliche acting gestures if you just animate to subtext, and it makes for a more believable performance. So that's one of the first things I do before I do anything. Before I draw anything, I'm thinking, what is the subtext? Like, what's the main purpose of this shot? And what is the shot trying to say? Because every shot has an intention. There's a reason why when they storyboarded this shot had a specific reason. And so you got to think about what that reason was and how the character feels about it. And so those are the two main things I do when I'm thinking about blocking a shot. So there was something that I added to the performance there, which I felt a lot of that was very pantomime, but that is also kind of the style of the show. But one thing that I particularly, looking back at now, I like about this is not any of the over-the-top acting at the beginning, but this idea that he looks away from him, and then he has this angry take where he looks back at him, and then he like sulks and he strops. And there's something I like about the acting choice, because he's like, I can't believe you right now. And that kind of like acting choice isn't something that was in the boards. And I could have just made him look and just look away and that was it. But just having a look back and be like, ugh, just that felt something that was like more genuine to the way he was saying it.
So Eddie asked, aren't you told those things from the director or the anim soup, I guess in your kickoff? So all the subtext, and the performance.
Yes. Yeah, so that's something that we usually run by the director, and obviously the animation supervisor and leads will be in that meeting as well, where when we're briefed on shots, they'll say, okay, so in this shot, so-and-so is thinking this and feeling that. And then you can ask them, okay, so that's where you can try and decipher how they're feeling in that moment. And then you can also, that can help you, give you like guidance as to kind of how to build your subtext. But in your briefing, when you get your allocations and everything, you'll have your briefing, you'll have your launch with your directors, and that's when they'll tell you the purpose for that shot and how to like deduce the performance and what needs to come out of the character. So this is one last one that I wanted to show. I think it's the last one here, which is probably the cartooniest I ever did, and this is actually from season 1. So I did this. I think this was like 3 years ago, and it was crazy because I actually will show you the progression for this shot simply because I had such little time to do it. I think it literally was like just over a day and a half, and it was absolutely mental. It's very last minute. We had already moved on to we'd moved on to the next episode, and it was always something that was going to be allocated to me if they wanted to do it, but the director was still undecided as to whether he wanted Happy in the shot or not. And so it basically, because they couldn't decide, they said, okay, move on to the next episode. We was halfway through animating the next episode, and then I get this message from my coordinator saying, yeah, they want to do that shot now. I was like, okay, how long is it? And they were like, well, for this, they split it up because the shot was 1 minute long, but there's 3 different beats in there where Happy was approximately 10 seconds or so in each beat. So it's like 30 seconds of animation. And for each of those segments, I had like a day and a half to animate. And so it was rather crazy. So it was like, 10 seconds for like a day and a half from scratch. And he was also very specific about what he wanted. So the director would say, could he go here to there and then here to here? And I would try that. And then he would say, no, it doesn't look right. And I'd say, how about from here to here and then there to there? And I'd try that, and you'd say no. And this is literally like back and forth, or I'd be blocking, like, I'd be submitting him a shot like every hour because he was so adamant to get this shot just completely out of the way. So it was very fast paced, but it was good. It was good to collaborate in that way. And so he couldn't decide on what he wanted. And I said, Clay, I have an idea. Do you mind if I try it? And he said, no, go ahead. So I blocked out a very rough pass and kind of got the staging and like the general like timing. And then he said, yeah, that looks really cool. Keep going. And so then I just went with that. And then, yeah, came out with this shot. So I'll play that now. And I've got one where it's a play-blast version and then one with the final result because they added so much motion blur and camera shakes to the final result that it's kind of hard to read. But I'll show you both. So this is the shot. It was pretty crazy. Yeah, so that was the final thing. And I'll quickly try and grab a progression of that. I have somewhere. There's quite a few passes, so when I say progression, it really is progressive in that sense. But I'll play that now. Hopefully you should see this. Oh, that's very loud. Turn it down a bit. So this was just the plate, essentially. So he always had to be at this moment. I'll just turn this on if you don't need it. So he always had to start off at that specific moment, and then this is where, basically, for a moment to explain, the car crashes and it rolls on its side, and the camera is traveling screen right. And there was this idea that Happy should be trying to resist the like pull that's happening from like the force that's happening from the car. And then as it makes impacts, then Happy crashes into the front mirror and then pings back. And basically the director was questioning what direction Happy should be resisting the force in and whether they should cheat it in certain like directions. So they said maybe he should be going away from the camera. And I said, well, if he's going sideways and the camera's moving screen right, surely he should be going screen... Well, technically, he should be going screen left if it's going the other way. So he should be trying to counter the direction. But just for, like, the flow of the shot, it made more sense to make him go screen right. So that's what you'll see in the final result. So this is where he pings forward. And then this is the director saying maybe he should go screen left. And there was just something about it. It just felt, I don't know, it just felt more fun to me to make him go slightly more profile. Because we kept on always making him, because the shot's a profile shot. So it made more sense for him to be fully profile. I think that's probably where it felt wrong. Because we were looking at it like, oh, it doesn't look right. Because he gave me drawing, but so he'd draw on it saying, how about this, how about that? And we ended up, Iketsun ended up being 3/4. And so this is like a slightly more blocking pass where I came up with my own idea. Where I thought it'd be cool to make him roll under. And then that'd be like a cool wipe almost. So he comes down and under. And then he goes from screen left to right and he's more profile. And then that makes more sense when he crashes that he pings against the review mirror. So now this is where I start to add in more in-betweens. I'm starting to get a bit more timing. Now this is where I think it's animated on 2s. No, not 2s yet. So again, this is probably still some more in-betweens. There you go. So this is where I started to add a little more scrambling effect in the limbs. Trying to get a few more in-betweens in there because it's such a fast action. And then he goes into like the Roger Rabbit pose. And then sucks against the rearview mirror and then pings back. Now this is on 2s, and this is where I drew over it in just our whatever video editing software we had at the time, and I did like a 2D pass of the tail and the ears to try and give it like almost like a wings rippling effect. And then this is on 2s with the tail and the ears passed done. and then this is when I splined and cleaned it up. I've got one other quick progression I can show you. This is a slightly faster one, like a shorter one, should I say. I'll play the sound for this one. Yeah, so you can see like the blocking pass, the reference, and then polish and clean up. And keep in mind, I think I animated that 3 years ago, so there's probably a lot I would change now. But yeah, you can still see, it's nice to see like progression stuff anyway. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. Is there any questions from anyone?
That was pretty amazing, mate. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask Arran on webcam, or post it up here in the chat box? Eddie said everyone's gobsmacked. So yeah, I love that last shot. That is a very complex shot, and going from you made good use of camera space, screen space.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think that's something that's really important to make sure you use if you have the possibility to, unless they really specifically need to be in a certain place. I think like using not only like left to right in terms of screen space, but also using depth can really bring out a lot in a shot. So like having them go from very far away to very close, it just makes it feel more dynamic.
For sure. Our ask to you always draw the thumbnails for your animations.
Not all the time. It depends on. It's a difficult one because it depends on the style, I would say, more so now. If I'm doing stuff that's slightly more realistic, then what I tend to do is I film referenced, and like I do draw like very rough thumbnails to just see if that kind of acting choice would work, and then from there I film reference. But mostly I would just go out there. Once I've got my shot of my subtext, I would just record myself, and then from there, whatever naturally comes to me, I will try and make key poses from. So I'll draw over the top of my reference, and I'll say, if I'm doing a certain pose, I'll draw over that and try and look at my character and be like, okay, so these are his graphic shapes, here's his design. How can I push my reference to make it more appealing and like, a very crafted pose that we would in animation? And that's kind of the approach I use now, because that way you still like maintain the like performance that you had in your reference. Whereas if I'm going for something slightly more cartoony, then I tend to do the other way around. So if it's more cartoony, I'll think, okay, what are my key poses, and I'll draw them. And I'll be like, okay, so these are the main beats I want to hit, because like your poses are more broad, and they're going to be slightly pushed more if it's more cartoony than realistic, and so they'll probably read. And because you're going to have more contrast in your poses, so I think it's more important to make sure they're crafted very well. And then from there, once I've got those poses, then I reference, so that way around. And then if there's anything extra that I bring to the performance in my reference, and I add that in my in-betweens when I go into like the blocking plus pass. So it depends on the style, honestly. Which way round I do it, but to answer the question, I will thumbnail, but it's usually at different points in the process depending on the style of the show.
Okay, and Eddie's asking, what's this shot here that you haven't screened?
So this is a slightly more creature-esque shot, and I haven't really animated many creatures before. But this was like an alien on Happy, and again, this is a slightly more grotesque moment where basically, it's going to sound weird to try and describe this sequence, So basically, there's some aliens involved. Spoilers for anyone who wants to watch the show. There's these aliens involved in the show, and basically they look like a piece of jam. They just look like some goop, some pink goop like jelly. And the main character, the main protagonist, Chris Maloney, accidentally thinks it's jam and eats it. So he eats this alien, and then he gets an upset stomach, and then goes to the toilet. And essentially, he disposes of this alien, and then out of it comes this creature that's now evolved into some weird, like, tentacle, pink, goopy thing. And so there's a sequence where he's fighting this thing that's trying to kill him in the toilet. It's quite a funny sequence. It sounds really weird. The whole show is super weird. But this is a shot, basically, I'll show you now, where I looked at a lot of reference from Hercules, Disney's Hercules, with the Hydra, because I liked the way the kind of like, so it has this really long neck and it kind of unravels on itself. And so I kind of looked at that as reference. You can see it here. So that was quite cool.
It's pretty gross.
And each of these limbs was like a separate rig, and there were certain moments in this sequence which I also animated on, as well as others, where it had to look like one thing. So we had like rigs attached to rigs, like different tentacles, and then there was a shot which I don't know if I have it on here, but basically there's a shot where it crawls out from between the character's legs and it attaches to his knees. So it was very difficult. They had to match move the character's knees, and then I had to animate this thing to almost like crawl and like clench around his leg. But not only was these tentacles like wrapping around, but there were limbs growing out of it as it did it. So it was very difficult, because essentially I had a rig that was wrapping around, as well as another rig coming out of that rig that was growing and also coming around. So I think there was something like 20 rigs on this thing in the end. It was absolutely madness. It took a long time back and forth with the CG supervisor to make it look right. But yeah, and here you can see it kind of unfolds, and then I tried to treat it like the end of this main tentacle was like a head, and it kind of like hisses. So I tried to create this like curl that comes around, but then it's almost like in here you can see this little curve. I tried to treat this like the head was changing direction, which means as that's curling now, it's made this like figure eight where it kind of twists back around on itself. And that kind of made it like a cool, almost like a head turn, you could imagine. That was my intention anyway. And then from there, again, I was still trying to consider it in like almost felt it like a question mark was my intention. So it's like this cool graphic shape. And then it has like this little hiss thing where it like wiggles from the tip. You can kind of see it unfold and then hiss. And then these things essentially just had to kind of roll and like stick around. So it was all about timing really, and like constraining it to the toilet lid at certain moments to kind of unfold on itself.
So Eddie was saying you didn't open this in, you didn't opt to do this in 2D in Toon Boom first and then follow that.
No, I didn't this time though. It's actually quite funny you say that, because we was given a reference of 2D, like they got a 2D animator to come in to give us a point of reference, but they did want to animate it in 3D. So, I mean, it didn't really end up looking anywhere, it didn't look like this in the end, like these shots, we wasn't really trying to match the 2D, but it was more to give an idea of how it would move. So they just did some tests, essentially like development tests, to be like, how would this weird tentacle thing move? And I got the idea, it kind of almost, the way he animated it almost looked like a serpent. Mm-hmm. So I tried to give it this like snake-like quality, where like I said, it has like a head at the end and hisses and that kind of thing. So yeah, that was the final shot. The only other one that I haven't shown you is this one, which is Bo Peep, who I only animated a few shots of, but I thought this was quite a fun one, where she comes around. Essentially, she can fly up but then she floats down by puffing up her dress. And she's supposed to. It was weird because she was supposed to be made of like porcelain. I think that's the material anyway. I may have butchered that now. But she's supposed to be made of like ceramic, kind of like plating. And so she had almost like Bo Peep from Toy Story. So she had to feel quite rigid, but they also wanted her dress to deform, so it kind of contradicted each other, but it's just a character trait, I guess you could say. You have to just take it with a pinch of salt. But it was quite fun that when she drops to try and get the dress to almost like catch. I looked at a reference from Alice in Wonderland, in Disney's Alice in Wonderland, when she comes down the rabbit hole and her dress puffs up and then she's like rocking down. There's always the best thing about having like nearly 100 years of animation now is no doubt someone's animated something similar before. So it's always, you're never going to do it the same way twice, but it's always good just to see how other people approached it, and maybe there's something in there that you can also learn from. Which is why I do these whole frame by frame things to begin with. Like there's some studies I've done for myself, like which I don't unfortunately have anymore. Like I'm a massive fan of Zootopia, as most animators are, and so I've broken down shots for myself in Zootopia, which unfortunately the sync sketches have expired now because after like a month of inactivity they delete them for server reasons. So yeah, they no longer exist. But I did do some studies with Zootopia stuff, some like Hotel Transylvania, like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I did one. Like I'm a big fan of that kind of style. So
I'm fairly sure you've studied Klaus as well.
yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I've looked at some Klaus stuff. I haven't actually broken down any shots from Klaus, but I've definitely studied them just by framing through Netflix. But I haven't gone through in Sync Sketch and drawn over one yet. But I say yet because it'd be really cool to break down some
Several other animators have done that. Alessandro Comparado and Wade and maybe Rusty Animator, Rusty Gray.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a fantastic movie. The animation is beautiful. And it's actually impressive how many incredible animators they got to work on that project. Like, it doesn't surprise me, but at the same time, it's just, you know, they've literally got, like, I don't know how to explain it. They got the top animators of their game, and they all came to one massive product. And so it's really cool. Like, I didn't even know that James Baxter worked on it until later. And I saw a shot, they were like, oh, this is James Baxter. I was like, what? James Baxter worked on Klaus? And I had no idea. It's like, it's that kind of thing where there's, like, just looking through the list of the animators that works in it is overwhelming. So, yeah, it's very cool.
Worked with Rusty Gray, didn't you?
Sorry?
You worked with Rusty Gray in Singapore, right? On Oddballs.
No, I didn't. No, I haven't.
I mixed you up with someone else.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, unfortunately, so far, I've only worked in London. Not that I don't like London, but I'd love to work elsewhere.
You will.
Yeah, I'm sure. With time, it will happen.
Yeah, with your reel, it's up to you if you wanted to or not, so you could go anywhere.
It looks like they're shoveling animators all over the world from one project to another all the time.
Yeah, totally. It's just whenever, a lot of it comes down to timing, and, you know, there's so many things to consider, but opportunities will open up sooner or later.
But don't you think that remote work is going to become more common?
Potentially.
So people don't want to move?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think it kind of depends on the studio dynamic, because I think I personally agree with the idea of keeping things in-house, just from my experience, simply because there's something about working in-house, like sitting beside fellow artists and having that collaboration that really makes the project work. Like, for me, as much as I love working on all these animated shows, one thing that makes them even more special is, I know it sounds cheesy, but it's true, that working with a team and like sitting beside all the people you work with makes it so much better, and you'll get a better product for it at the end of the day. So as much as I've done remote work myself, but there's something about working in house with everyone that just it makes it so much better. So for me personally, I would, if someone said move abroad, I would be more inclined to move abroad than say if they gave me the choice, I'd rather go away than sit at home. I'd probably end up just, you end up getting locked in your room.
Yeah, but I was just thinking that it looks like they're like shoveling them around every 6 months or so, and most people have like a life.
Oh yeah,
a wife and kids and houses and.
That's very true.
Up and go anywhere.
Yeah, that is true. I guess that's why it's probably important to make sure that you situate yourself when you want to settle down in somewhere where there's a lot of industry. Like, thankfully for me, London is like, London's only getting bigger when it comes to the industry. Like, it's already massive within VFX, and in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of feature animation that's been moving over here, which is excellent. It's exactly what I want to be moving into. So I've been quite grateful in that sense. But
it's so expensive to live there.
It is, but they also pay you better, so they compensate to some degree. So, it's the same as everything. Everything's in proportion.
Yeah, so I'm trying to do some remote work as well. I've just recently this year gone freelance, and it seems that more video games studios want to get into or are happy to have remote animators because you can just kind of say this is the one little clip of motion that we want you to do rather than this is an overall shot. So that kind of works out, but it's also a little bit kind of difficult for me. I'm almost about 2 hours away from London, and that's not a decent commute, and